Hello, welcome to the Horti-Culturalists. I'm Matthew Lucas.
And I'm Stephen Ryan.
And we post every week on a Friday, so do hit subscribe if you want to watch our continuing horticultural adventures. And Stephen, every Monday...
Yes, I will answer a question that you send in less than 60 seconds. So do engage with that. It'll be great fun.
Put your questions in the comments below and we'll try, I won't, Stephen will try and answer it in 60 seconds. Stephen, where are we today? I need a clue.
Yeah, no you don't. It's right behind you. We're at the System Garden at Melbourne University, and we're fortunately going to meet the head gardener here, Virginia McNally. She's going to talk us through all the things we've ever wanted to know about a system garden, even if you didn't know anything about them to start with.
I was too afraid to ask, and I must say, Virginia immediately corrected me because I did say systems garden. She says, no, Matthew, just one S, it's one system.
Yeah, well, exactly. So that's how it works.
So we're going to find out all about the system.
Yes, and we're also going to find out a little bit of history of this garden, so its background, and how it sort of works, and what its use is. I mean, why do we have a system garden? The very question we'll have to ask her.
Which is so interesting, and I have often walked through here, and I just love this place, so I'm so excited to hear about it from the voice of authority.
Exactly.
Which is not you in this case.
No, it's not me in this case, so that's fantastic. I can sort of hand the baton on to somebody who knows this.
Yeah. Well, without further ado, let's go meet Virginia.
What a good idea.
Virginia McNally, thank you very much for having us in the system garden. You did correct me earlier. There's only one system, Matthew. There's no S.
So here we are, Melbourne University, system garden, curator thereof.
Yes.
So, Virginia, there's some questions that need to be answered, I think. First, what is a system garden?
That is a big question.
Yeah.
Yes.
A system garden is a grouping of plants that is laid out in a taxonomic classification system that illustrates plant evolution.
All right, so when you say that, though, of course, plant evolution as a science is changing all the time.
Yes.
So when was your system set up? Because you can't just pick up your plants and rearrange them just because the botanists have decided that.
Which people love. These crazy taxonomists love changing the names and the family groups and goodness.
All the time.
How do you manage that?
Job. Well, as you can see by the amount of old plants that we've got, we've had two systems. One was Balfour.
So it is plural, Virginia.
It is. So one was Balfour, who was French taxonomist.
Yeah.
And the latest one is Conquest, who's an American taxonomist. And the reason we chose the American taxonomist is because Flora of Australia uses him. That was in the 1980s.
Yeah.
And then now with the changes in DNA, the botanists in our fabulous institution don't particularly like that system, but...
Tough.
Yeah, they'll have to live with it because you're not going to move this around like a chessboard.
Try moving some of these.
Yeah.
So for my limited understanding then, so we start at the dawn of time and we go around in a clockwise notion to the, well, not the end of time, but...
to Asteraceae, which are the daisies. They're the most evolved.
Right.
Yeah, so we start at sort of ferns and
lichens
and mosses,
and we work our way through conifers and other cone-bearing things. Oh yes, sorry, I nearly did forget cycads. Isn't that awful? So we go through the cycads and the conifers, and then we go to the angiosperms as we come around. So we.
Now, for those of us who don't know, what's an angiosperm?
It's a flowering plant.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, okay. Simple as that, really. So the flowering plants, but then we go round them in a sort of systematic way as to when we see that they evolved. Yes?
And so the daisies are the most evolved?
Yes, but it's not a straight line or a circular line. There's, evolution happening all over.
Yeah, that's right. So, yes, even primitive groups are evolving still, so they could be producing new forms and things. Yeah. So it's a little bit sort of tenuous, but anyhow, it sort of works. And so therefore a system garden was put together, I guess, or I take it this way, so that people who are studying botany could come out and study the evolution of the plants as they sort of vaguely evolved in nature.
Yes.
Really.
So when it was originally set up, it was 3 years before Origin of the Species was published.
I was going to ask you about Darwin and the Victorian fashion for, I guess, evolution and understanding all of those dynamics.
So Professor McCoy, who was the professor who set this up, was a real anti-evolutionist. So,
oh dear.
Irony of irony.
Yes.
Yeah, it certainly is. So now, you mention him though, but what was the year when this was first set up?
1856.
Yeah, and when you think about it in the context of things, I mean, that was 50 years before Australia became a country, you know, so this was the colony of Victoria, and yet we had Melbourne University working itself madly to establish itself as an important institute. So when you look at it in a slightly systematic way, it's bizarre that we were so early in the piece doing something like this.
Yes, yeah, no, it's incredible.
Yeah.
And this was the seat of debate. You know, you had the evolution versus the creationists happening right here.
Did they have jewels and things? You know, you expect people to sort of meet at dawn.
Yeah.
Yes.
How extraordinary,
Yeah.
and how interesting that this sort of predates the whole explosion of the theory of evolution.
Yes.
So my question then, 1856. This is now your responsibility. I
Yes.
feel the burden of responsibility. I mean, how is it as a horticulturalist and as a professional to take on something like this, which is already over a century old and one hopes will continue?
Yes.
Is that a terrible burden? I mean,
It's a fantastic burden.
Yes, I like your attitude. I was hoping you were going to put it that way.
I mean, it's great to have a purpose in a garden.
Yeah.
Because there's, you know, over 350,000 plants that you can choose from. So I always find that difficult when someone asks me a question, well, what should I plant there? And I'm going,
Yes.
okay,
Because-
350,000 choices.
Yeah, that's right. Well, you can be paralysed by choice.
Yes, that's exactly right. So I like to have a system and a way of choosing plants, and this is a very specific one. We have a master plan, which I think really helps set out the principles for the garden and gives us a leap into the future. You know how we were talking about what helps you stay motivated? That's one of the things. So you kind of want to tick off little boxes every once in a while and keep it moving forward.
So what are some of the next things that are on your list to do in relation to the system garden?
So there used to be a moat behind, well, probably...
Every garden should have its moat.
That's right. It's over there.
Yeah.
And we're going to reinstate at least...
So the moat was
half.
around this tower?
Yes, so there used to be a conservatory and the university went bankrupt in the 1890s. Well, nearly bankrupt. They had a dodgy accountant and
Oh dear.
they had to sell off the conservatory and the plants within it. And
Goodness.
that was kind of like the fall of the system garden. It's one of its falls.
A low point.
A low point.
Having
Thank
to
you.
flog the
Yeah, yeah.
contents.
Yes.
Oh dear. So one hopes then that looking into the future, that in fact the university will see the value of this, because I understand from something we were talking about earlier that this is one of Australia's very few system gardens and certainly the oldest.
Yes.
So it's really important historically. It's got a couple of trees that are on the National Trust Register, and having had a cursory look around, I can see lots of quite rare plants. If you had to have a clearing sale now, we could make quite a lot of money, I reckon, out of this garden. So it is a really important asset, not just to the university, and it is open to the public. You're in charge, I know, but how many people help you with the garden here?
Well, we have 4 people employed by the university, and then there is a team of contractors
I am.
who help us, and that ranges from about 4 to 6
Yeah.
for the whole of the university.
Yeah, and I have to say, for those who've never been to Melbourne University, it's got substantial garden space in it. It's remarkable in the middle of a city like Melbourne, where there's so much open space. And I know over the years they've whittled away a little bit at it by whacking in another building here and there, but nonetheless it's still got a huge open space.
Yes, we're very fortunate.
And it's beautiful. I have spent a lot of time in these gardens wandering through, and there are always little nooks and corners that you discover full of just micro beauty. Even like the potted things are so beautifully placed and the specimens are wonderful. It's an incredible environment. So if you are in Melbourne or visiting, do come during the week to visit the system garden. It's wonderful.
But you can wander elsewhere.
Elsewhere is open
on the weekend.
throughout the weekend.
Yeah.
Virginia, thank you so much. I
Great
think
to meet you both.
and to meet you, and there are many things that we want to go and look at, so we might go and look at some specific things now.
Fantastic.
And not
You
hold
do
you up
that.
anymore. But
Yes.
thank you. You've
Thank
got a
you
master
very much.
plan to roll out. Thanks,
Okay.
Virginia.
Bye-bye.
So from the dawn of time, we've started with mosses, lichens and ferns.
Yeah.
But of course, a lichen
is not really a plant in some ways. It's only partially a plant because a lichen is an algae, which is in fact a plant, combined with a fungi. And in some cases, it's more than one fungi or more than one algae that make up the body of the lichen. So they're a weird group of organisms. I suppose you've got to call them.
Symbiotic relationship.
Yeah.
So then we come to cycads.
Yes, now cycads are a really interesting group, and we've got some lovely specimens behind us here. They look like palm trees, and to a lot of the uninitiated, they would say they were a palm tree.
And I'm going to take some footage of ones over there which have got trunks and look like palm trees.
Yeah, exactly. But they're cone-bearing plants, so they're more closely related to conifers. So they're a very primitive group of plants that would have been around in the days of the dinosaurs and earlier. And in fact, they produce big cones on them. A lot of them have quite poisonous toxins within them.
Do they?
Oh yes. Well, you've got to get rid of those dinosaurs somehow or another. And
meteor.
Yes, and they're interesting plants in that they're cone-bearing. They tend to have male and female plants.
Yeah.
So when you have cycads, if you want seed, you need to have a collection of them so that you make sure you get at least one male and one female to get
need friends.
Seed. And they come from all over the place, from hot, dry areas of southern Africa, right through the tropics into places like Honduras. They grow down into Australia. They come from practically all the way around the equator.
I was going to say, any in the northern hemisphere, because there are in the southern hemisphere, there are native Australian
there's a number of them that grow up in China, Taiwan. It's surprising the extent to which they grow further north as well. And of course we have them further south of the equator down into Australia and other places. So they're from all around the world, and they're one of the really truly primitive groups in the plant world.
Any in Europe?
Not as far as I'm aware. So I don't think there's any native cycads in Europe.
But one of the things is, particularly here too, but they make fantastic pot specimens. They do, well, not all of them, I suppose, each species, but a lot of them, the more common ones, do incredibly well. And there's some great specimens here which we'll show you in pots. So they do work really well.
And are used a lot in
garden.
Yeah, but they're also used as indoor plants in a lot of places as well. So many of the cycads are good at coping with low light levels.
Yeah.
They're reasonably drought tolerant, so you don't have to be watering them every 5 minutes. And they're certainly sculptural and ornamental plants. So, and in fact, there's many species in the wild that are becoming threatened just by over collecting. So that's one of the things that is a major issue. Most of the cycads, if not all of them, are under the CITES regulations, so you can't move them from country to country unless you've got specific permits and scientific research going on or whatever. So they can be quite difficult to get, and because they're slow, they're always a little bit on the pricey side to buy. So you do have to be aware of that as well when you're growing them. But wonderful group of plants.
Let's get off at the next station on the evolutionary train ride. What is it?
Conifers. Let's go and have a look at some of those.
All right, so we might be at the conifer station, but this is a yew tree.
Yes.
Is it a conifer?
Yeah, of course they are.
They are.
It's a needled conifer. But having said that, it doesn't have classical cones.
No.
So it doesn't have scaly woody cones. It actually has a berry-like fruit with the seed sitting on the top.
Yes, because it has red berries, doesn't it?
Yes, exactly. So yews are conifers. This one's actually a Japanese yew, a Cephalotaxus, in its pencilly form. And it makes a great conifer for a garden, and yes, the foliage is conifer-like, but I want to have a look at some of the ones that are so different from your average conifers that in fact a lot of people may not even realise that what they're looking at is in fact in this primitive group.
Which might be one right behind us.
There is in fact one that adds to the story.
Well, let's go and have a look at that one.
All right, what a good idea.
So what is this?
Well, again, another conifer,
Yeah.
but this one doesn't fit what people would class as the classical mould either. And this is Taxodium distichum, the North American swamp cypress. So if you have visions of those Everglades swamps,
Yes.
you know, wandering around in your tulle drinking mint julep.
Being eaten by an alligator.
Exactly. Then it may well be under these trees you do it. And the main difference between these trees and most other conifers is that they're part of a small group of conifers that are actually deciduous. So the needles will shed every autumn. They generally go a lovely russety reddy brown before they do.
Yeah.
And of course in the spring when they refurbish their growth, it's a wonderful lively fresh green. So not all conifers are stodgily, boringly the same all year round.
And very soft. It's very soft.
It's sort of tactile. You feel the need to pat it.
Now, when it sheds, is it this whole thing that
Yes.
sheds? So that's kind of like a leaf.
Yeah, in a sense, but it's actually a stem with lots of needles on it.
Right.
But it has a shedding capability of losing all those little shoots each
Right.
year. So they drop off as a section, not as individual needles.
And so one of the key identifiers, I guess, of the whole group is the cone.
Yes, yeah. All conifers are classed as having cones, although some of them don't look like cones particularly. But cones are made up usually of scales, and the seed sits down inside the scale, and to all intents and purposes it's naked. It's not surrounded by fleshy fruit or whatever. So the pollen can get in. It's generally wind pollinated through the scales.
Right.
So there you go. So Taxodium distichum, the North American swamp cypress, a deciduous conifer.
And a very beautiful one. Well, let's go on and look at something else that doesn't also look like a conifer.
Yeah, what a good idea, let's.
So I see you found the Araucarias again, Stephen.
Well, in this case, the Horti-Culturalists, it's an Agathis, or what we would call in Australia a Kauri pine. But this one's not one of the Australian ones. This is one of the New Caledonian ones.
Yeah.
So it comes from the tropical islands of New Caledonia. It's Agathis moorei.
Yes.
And it's another one of those interesting groups of trees that sort of have the Gondwanan connection.
Yeah.
Because we have 3 species in Australia. They have about 7 or 8, I think, in New Caledonia. There's 1 or 2 that come from Papua New Guinea. There's 1 from New Zealand. And so that sort of gives you a sense of the distribution. Oh, I forgot the one in Vanuatu and Fiji as well.
There you
So they're tropical conifers. They're not very cold tolerant. Although, having said that, I've got a young plant of this one, moorei, growing in the garden at Macedon in a very sheltered spot. And it's now a little taller than I am. So we're going along well.
And your sort of pet theory is that they may have survived a few ice ages and so have evolved the capacity to take colder temperatures.
Well, that's what I'm wondering, because in New Caledonia, it's obviously quite warm tropical climate. In at least the last few million years, probably had never seen a frost. And yet some of the conifers in that part of the world seem to be able to cope with at least minor frosts. So I think they do have a bit of inherent hardiness that they don't actually need in their natural habitat, but could come in quite useful in the home garden.
Yes, and interestingly too, I mean, looking at it, of course, it doesn't look like a needle, it doesn't look like a conifer.
Yeah, exactly. It looks more like a broad-leafed plant.
Yeah.
But strictly speaking, these are probably still needles.
All right, well, I think there is one more curious one
Oh,
that we
yeah.
go and have a look at.
Yeah, we've got to go and have a look at this
All right,
one. It's really
off we
weird.
go. All right, so why has this one piqued your fancy? Can I just say too, it's in quite a shady spot.
Which it's perfectly happy to be in, because it grows in forests in its natural habitat.
Yeah.
And this comes from the genus of Phyllocladus, the celery pines or celery top pines.
Oh, the leaves look like celery leaves. I
Yeah,
can see that.
yeah, you can see that. But what you're looking at isn't a leaf at all.
No, it's a needle.
No, it's not that either.
What is it then?
It's a flattened stem. It's a cladode. So what this
Cladode. That
Yes.
sounds like something from Doctor Who.
Yeah, well, what this tree has decided to do is to not have true foliage at all.
Right.
So all of what looks like foliage on this plant is in fact flattened stems. And you can tell that because if you look at this one here, you can see the flattened stem, and yet it branches at the end, so it's not a leaf.
Right.
So it keeps branching, and it's doing
I
that
see
all
that.
over.
Oh, my
See?
goodness.
So each cladode comes to a tip and then produces new cladodes from the tip. So it keeps growing from there. So although this is a conifer, it doesn't have any needles. It doesn't have classical cone-shaped cones. Again, it's another one of these ones that has tiny little berry-like seed containers.
Yeah.
And this particular one is Phyllocladus aspleniifolius, meaning leaves like an asplenium, which is a type of fern.
Yeah.
And it's the celery top pine from Tasmania.
Wow.
And so we have 1 species of Phyllocladus in Australia from Tasmania. There are at least 2, maybe 3 in New Zealand. And they have the biggest one, or one with the biggest cladodes that's got quite large ones. And then there's also New Guinea, and I think some of the islands have species as well. So
Wow.
it is really quite a remarkable unconifer-like conifer.
And truly extraordinary. Well, there you go. I would have walked past this and not given it a second glance, Mr. Ryan.
Yeah, well, there you go. You and I are both learning on today's little exercise, I have to say.
I think we should get off at the next stop on the evolutionary train ride.
Why not indeed?
Okay, let's go. Angiosperms, Stephen.
Yes, the flowering plants. We've spent a lot of time with our plants from the mosses right through the cycads to the conifers. But then there's a breakaway that happened way back when the first flowering plants came on the scene, and they have evolved in millions of different directions. So what we thought we'd do is have a quick look at some of the sort of sense of what a flowering plant is made of. So this area of the system garden is really good for that, because we can start here where we've got things like the bromeliads, we've got the banana palms or banana plants, we've got cactuses as we go further to the to my left, which are all flowering plants. So,
and then with the cunning ability,
yes, with this technology, we go round and round and round. And as you come around, you suddenly find the grasses, which of course are very important flowering plants as well. There's a pandanus in the middle there, and it comes round to the trunks of some fairly substantial palms, which are also classed, of course, as flowering plants. So that gives you a sort of a potted view of some of the angiosperms, not necessarily in what's considered to be their evolving order, but certainly as they sit here in the garden, in the system garden at Melbourne Uni.
And there's a couple of amazing things we might just go and have a look at in bloom here, because they are stunning.
Yes, what a good idea. Well, this caught my attention. This is one of the Dyckias, Dyckia rariflora. I'm not quite sure why it's called rariflora. They don't seem to be particularly rare. They're all flowering here, and it's a wonderful thing with waxy yellow flowers and a rosette of rather spiky, nasty looking leaves at ground level. And of course, all the bromeliads come from the Americas, so this will come from Central to South America somewhere, and it is just a lovely, lovely plant. I'm very fond of it. And we've got another one I want to show you over there. Now, another bromeliad is from the genus Puya, and this is Puya mirabilis, meaning miraculous, and it really is the most beautiful soft apple green flower. It's one of my favourite Puyas, and it's almost thornless, so it's one of the friendliest Puyas that you could possibly grow, and of a good stature for gardens. So rather a beautiful and unusual flower colour.
Here's an interesting moment in the systems garden, a bee hotel.
Yes. And they're becoming quite a popular thing to do worldwide, because we need to give insects homes. But it's interesting to note that some of the bamboos and things that have been put in here are far too large, so they're never going to attract a native bee. We've also got to accept the fact that predators can move in, so there's a fabulous spider's web there waiting for some native bees to come along. But it's all part of the rich tapestry of insect attracting.
It was, and Virginia was pointing out that the native bees like to live near each other, but not with each other.
Yeah,
so she calls this the student dorm.
Yes, which seems to work quite well, and you can see where, in fact, they've actually decided to take up residence and lay their eggs, because they've got the little sort of mud seal over the top of the hole. So
very interesting.
It has worked at least in part.
So you can buy these from hardware stores, but I guess the thing to point out then is maybe you want to get something that's got smaller apertures so insects can be happy in it.
Yes, exactly. They like a nice, comfortable little nest.
And the evolutionary wheel turns, Stephen, and brings us
to, believe it or not, one of the most advanced groups in the plant world, which are commonly known and commonly seen as daisies.
Plain thing, poor darling.
Yes, exactly. But they do have a flower that is quite interesting, because the flower itself is not a flower.
Yeah.
The flower itself is a compound flower. So every petal is a ray floret, so that's actually a flower, and all those little yellowy bits down in the centre are all individual flowers. So a daisy is a compound flower, and in fact, before it became Asteraceae, the family was known as the Compositae. So the flowers were composite flowers. So as simple as a daisy looks, it's actually quite complicated. We just got barked. So there you go. So these are very high on the evolutionary scale of things, as simple as they look.
Wow, how fantastic. Well, it has been an extraordinary journey, and if we spin around...
here we go.
Right round, baby, right round.
Yes, here we go.
Over there is where we began with ferns, mosses and cycads.
Yep, exactly.
Over there is conifers.
Yes.
And then we got into, what are they called with flowers?
Angiosperms.
Angiosperms.
Yeah.
And then we've ended up back here with, I was going to say the common daisy, but it's less than common, is it?
Yes, and I have to say, they're a group of plants that I spend a lot of time trying not to study, because it's a complex web you weave when you try to learn about the very large Asteraceae family.
How fascinating. Well, I have loved this very tailored journey through the system garden, because I've been here many times and never really understood what the system was or what the point was, but now I get it. It's so interesting.
It is. It's fascinating stuff, and I think it's been a great day to be here at Melbourne University to look at this remarkable and fairly unique system garden. I mean, there are lots of them around the world, but it's probably only one of 2 or 3 in Australia, and it's certainly by far the oldest, and so we've been very privileged to be here.
Yes, and a big thank you to Virginia McNally for her time, the head gardener here at Melbourne University Gardens. And also, just another observation, it's actually really beautiful, because often you get the, well, I think that perhaps science-based gardens can just, be very rows of plants, but this is actually aesthetically really pleasing.
It is, and in fact you could have easily made a system garden that wasn't, and in fact the first director of Melbourne Botanic Gardens, Baron von Mueller, was basically setting the whole garden up as a system garden because he was a scientist. He lost his job as director of the Melbourne Botanic Gardens to William Guilfoyle, who was a landscape designer, because people wanted to promenade and not just learn about how plants fitted together.
And as I have said before, I like pretty things, Stephen, so I'm with him. Let's landscape it all.
Yes,
anyway,
exactly. But this has been a great day.
It has. Thank you so much to Melbourne University again for having us. And if you want to know what we're doing next week, you're going to have to hit subscribe. We post every week on a Friday. Who knows what our next adventure could be, Stephen?
Oh, could be anywhere and about anything, but do come and join us.
We'll see you next week.
Bye all.